What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another episode of Rustomod. We are in the winter season and it's starting to get cold, so that means we have some winter projects that I want to get started on. So you guys know we're wrapping up our budget boosted Buick. Like, we took that Silverado motor, we pulled it out of there, we sold the parts off the Silverado to be able to fund these kind of projects, and that's the kind of stuff that I like to do. Now I want to show you guys kind of budget oriented ways to make really cool project cars in your backyard where it doesn't take a whole machine shop to be able to make an entire car. Now I want to continue to do more projects like that, and this is the idea that I have. So we actually built a 1968 Chevrolet C10 on an Escalade chassis, and unfortunately I had to sell that build, guys, because I had to buy my house. So I want to try to build something similar to that. Now, a while ago, I actually made a similar video to our budget boosted Buick build where I said you could try to build a Chevy truck for as cheap as possible if you find the right chassis. And so instead of making just one video about that, I wanted to do a build series on something similar to that concept. So a little bit of backstory to my plan. So I've been trying to find a C10 that I could actually chassis swap onto a frame. And I've been looking all over Marketplace, and C10s have gotten insane. But one thing that isn't crazy in price yet is the larger trucks, like this truck behind me. This is a 1966 Chevy C60, and it is really solid in comparison to a lot of the C10 trucks. A lot of these trucks were just used, parked in a barn, and don't really have a ton of miles on them like the pickup trucks did, and generally the cabs are in a lot better shape. So since the C10 market is so crazy, I wanted to see if we could do a C60 swap onto a newer GM chassis. So that's what got me started on this project, and I want to see if we can handle this thing on a budget. This truck actually was a one-owner truck. It's really cool. It was a local truck, and they just used it on the farm. And fortunately, the thing was stored inside for all its life, and it's actually really solid. But unfortunately, the brakes are really hard to source. It has a hydraulic clutch. The motor doesn't really run the greatest, and it's just kind of worn out after all this time. Now, we did get this truck running, and it does run okay. But to be able to get this truck on the road, it would take a ton of money, and it doesn't really make any sense to be able to put thousands and thousands of dollars just to get a 66 truck on the road to drive and ride like a 66 dump truck. This thing has a bunch of leaf springs on it. It rides really bad. I'm sure the top speed on this thing is maybe 50 miles an hour. Now, I want to be able to drive this thing everywhere. I want to go to car shows. I want to go all across the country with this thing, hop in it, fire it up, and drive it like a modern vehicle. But I want the aesthetics look of the old C60. So that's the plan for this project. So what chassis swap are we going to do? Well, let me go grab it. So this behind me is a 2002 Chevy Silverado that I've been parting out kind of behind the scenes to try to see how much parts I could sell off this thing. I got this thing for $400, but the reason I got it so cheap was because the rear end was blown out of it, and the transmission was good, the motor was good, the chassis is good, but the rear end was junk. So I found a used rear end, put it in there, and it runs and drives. Now, we actually cut the roof off of this thing. We've been doing burnouts with this thing. It's actually a ton of fun. We went through the woods in my backyard. We had a bunch of fun with this truck, just bashing it around and just having a blast with it, but it runs and drives really good. So I thought this truck would be a perfect candidate for a budget chassis swap on our C60. To give you a little bit of a walk around on this truck just so you can see what we're going to do, and then we can go to work on trying to yank the cab off of the C60 and the cab off of the Silverado. Now, very similarly to my 68 C10, the GM chassis from 1999 to 2007 are very similar. 2006 and a half, 2007 is where they switched over to the new body style. Now with the 68 that I did, the chassis was actually a 2007 to 2014 Escalade chassis. But the chassis and the frames are very, very similar. And if you guys want to do kind of a budget-oriented swap, you can find these trucks really cheap. Most of the time, they're going to have a blown transmission or a blown differential, but the motors usually are pretty good. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually yank this entire body off of here. We're going to leave everything alone. We're going to leave the accessories alone. We're going to leave the fuel tank alone. We're going to leave the differential alone. We're not gonna change anything because we want this thing to be dead nuts reliable. And I think that's what a lot of guys want whenever they wanna do a chassis swap like this. I get a ton of emails of guys wanting to do something similar to my 68 C10, and they just want to drive the thing. And that's kind of what I want to do with this project. I just want to hop in it, go. It doesn't need a crazy cam, it doesn't need turbos. I just want to be able to drive the thing every day and drive it like a newer Silverado. But all that talking out of the way, that's the game plan on the C60 chassis swap. So what we're going to do now is we're going to try to unbolt everything on the cab. We're gonna pick this thing up, we're gonna pick this thing up, and we're gonna take that cab and slap it on there, see how all the cab mounts work, all that stuff, and we can see how difficult it is to actually put the cab on the chassis. Got the C60 in the shop. It is huge in here. First course of action is to try to see if we can get the cab mounts unbolted. So there's one there, and then there's two that are in the back. And then we have the core support mount, which there are two bolts hanging down on the front. This core support's a little different than a C10. So I'm gonna have to try to figure out how we can make this core support mount work, or we're just gonna have to chop it off and figure out something else. But if you are doing a chassis swap, the cab is exactly the same as a C10. The front clip is the only thing that's really different. The cab will mount to a Silverado or Escalade or Yukon or whatever you're gonna do the exact same way as this will, just the core support on the front is different. The other thing that's different obviously is the width of the front clip, but that shouldn't be too big a deal. If you're running a C10, there's plenty of guys that run a 60 to 66 C10 front clip on a Silverado chassis or Yukon chassis. So really common swap, but I just want to see if we can do it with the C60. That's what kind of make this thing pretty cool. I had to pull out all this sound deadener / rubber floor stuff. It's literally like a second gen dashboard. It's just disintegrating. So pull that out really easy, and then you can see the cab mounts are right underneath that. Now there is some rust starting, as you can see right here. It's really common to be on top of the cab mounts that it's starting to rot on both sides. So I'm gonna have to try to fix that before we put it on the chassis. And the other thing that I was looking at is the actual transmission tunnel unbolts out of these, which is cool, because I don't think we're gonna be able to run this transmission tunnel. So I'm gonna just unbolt this, and then maybe I could find a different one to be able to put on top of here and then make that work. Here's a look underneath the truck. If you can see, there's the front cab mount, got that bolt out, and then you can see our bolted in transmission tunnel right here. And then the rear cab mounts are back here on this cross member. So I'm gonna zip those out real quick. And I'm gonna spray everything down with some Skeet Skeet from Sweet Patina to try to get all this stuff off. It's freezing penetrating oil. That'll help get all these bolts out of here that have been sitting for whoever knows how long in this truck. Transmission tunnel is unbolted. The shifter, whenever we lift the cab off, should just be able to go right through the floor, make it pretty easy. So the cab mounts are undone. I think I got all the lines and stuff that were hooked to the cab. So now I'm gonna work on the front clip. So it looks like that core support mount is on the front, and then we have all the fuel lines and the radiator and all that stuff we have to pull out of here. And then we should be ready to go to lift this thing off. right, so we should be ready to go with lifting this off. Pulled the hood off. We're gonna get the forklift, strap it up to the forks, and then strap the front clip. I'm gonna try to pull the front clip with it, and we'll see how it goes. But we're just gonna yank that off. Hopefully everything goes pretty smooth. I don't know if there's anything else hooked up. I think we got everything, but we're gonna find out. Well, we got our cab off of the chassis, trying to clean up a little bit. So the next step is to pull this cab off the chassis. So Jake just pulled it around, running pretty good. Definitely needs a tune-up. It has 200,000 miles on it, so transship's pretty good. We've been driving it around. It runs good.
To do some burnouts.
Yeah, do a burnout. One tire fire.
Runs great.
Runs pretty good. That's the last burnout this thing will probably do as a Silverado and not a C60. All right, so I'm just gonna pull this thing apart really quick. I kind of went over how these things come apart in the Buick videos. They're very simple to pull apart. Pull the fenders off on each side, then you can lift the cab off and you can get to the whole engine and everything. I'm probably gonna pull the core support off because whenever we put that cab onto this chassis, I'm not gonna have any of this stuff. So going to pull all the radiator, core support stuff, but we're gonna try to save as much stuff as we can, like the booster and all the lines and everything. We wanna save the wiring harness for now. I think I might just try to run this harness on it and just try to save as much as we can because we can use that on the C60 project. All right, just like that, it should be ready to go for us to lift the cab off. Now, it is gonna be a little harder because we sawzalled the roof off, so I have nothing to lift from. So I think I'm just gonna stick the forklift under the side maybe, and just flip it over. Just like that, we have our chassis and another cab in my driveway. Well, yesterday we got a ton done. We actually pulled the entire cab off the C60 and we pulled the entire cab off of our Silverado that we're going to chassis swap. And today I want to get a little bit more done. So I'm actually borrowing the forklift from my job, so I'll have to bring that back on Monday morning. So I really want to try to utilize it as best as I can. So my goal for today is to try to just set the cab on the chassis. I don't know if it's going to be permanent. I want to see where all the cab mounts and stuff are, but I don't really have anything here to lift the cab up. So I want to try to just set it on there and then I can try to block it up just so I can fix all the cab mounts and all that stuff whenever we get to that point. But we can at least see what it's going to look like on the new chassis. So the first thing I'm going to have to do is try to pull off all this stuff that's going to get in the way. I don't really need the air box. I don't really need all the air conditioning lines and stuff like that. So I'm going to yank all this stuff off real quick, try to clean it up, get it as condensed as possible. And then I'm going to have to try to pull the inner fenders out of the C60. So I don't know if the inner fenders are going to fit but if they don't fit, then I don't have them in my way. So I'm gonna just yank these two out of the way and we should be good to go. I'm gonna pull off all the stuff on the firewall that might get in our way also, and possibly have to pull off the steering column. The steering column is really big on this thing, so might have to yank that out as well. I did grab some stuff off of the Silverado Cab. So I grabbed the brake booster. I'm not sure if we can use that, but I want to at least try it. So I have the brake booster. It is a drive-by-wire. So I grabbed the gas pedal. Just similarly to the Buick build, they do sell a harness for very cheap on eBay or Amazon, and it comes with the drive-by-wire connector. So I want to try that. I want to see if it works. I do have the drive-by cable original intake from the Buick motor, so if it doesn't work, I can just switch to that one. And then I also grabbed the steering column U-joint because we might be able to use that as well. We need something to adapt to the Silverado steering column to the new whatever column we're gonna put into the C60. So I'm gonna try to make all that stuff work, but first I gotta clean up all this stuff, get all this stuff unbolted, and get it ready to sit down on the new chassis. Man, that was quite a bit of work. All these bolts were pretty much rusted, so I had to spray it down with the Skeet from Sweet Patina. Some of them came out, a lot of them broke, so hopefully I can get some new inner fenders if this fenders don't work, but I wanted to pull them out because now we have so much room in case we have any problems, which I don't think we will. This engine bay is absolutely massive. I also pulled the steering column out real quick just to get it out of the way, but that is what it's gonna be for now. So let me slice that thing off, lift this thing up, and set it on the new chassis. All right, got these two lined up real quick. Just trying to center the wheel well so I can kind of see where everything is going to sit once I get the cab over it. I want this thing as low as possible because I want all the suspension travel. I don't want to lower this frame. I want it to ride like a stock truck, but I want it to look low. So that way, if I can get the cab as low as I can, it already looks low and you don't have to lower the chassis as much. That's my goal, but I'm gonna just lift it up and then slap it on there and see what it looks like. All right, so I got the cab kind of close on the frame. It's not down all the way yet. You can see the front wheel needs to come forward quite a bit more. The problem I'm having is it looks like it's gonna hit this core support mount, which I kind of figured it would. So I'm just gonna cut this off. I think I can just make something else that's gonna work for the core support. And it might hit these body mounts on the front, and then obviously these like bumper mounts are also on there. Probably should have taken those off before, but it looks like it might hit those. So I don't know if I should just cut them off. I kind of hate cutting stuff because once we get it on there, you might be able to use some of that stuff. But for now, I'm just gonna lop off that front core support mount, and then hopefully we can get it down a little bit farther. All right, well, we're getting pretty close. I am kind of looking at it, trying to see what it's gonna look like on where I want the cab on the frame. So perfectly, this little cutout here is like identical to the Silverado chassis, so that's really cool. So I don't have to trim anything on the body, which I really don't want to do. But the problem is it is gonna hit these two core support mounts on the front. So I am gonna have to probably cut those off on both sides, and then I can get the cab to come down a little bit more. I'm trying to line it up as close as I can on the forklift in the wheel well. It looks like, it's hard to tell obviously because the front isn't level with the back, but that's why I want to cut those off. That way I can get the front down, and then we can take that strap off and then kind of adjust the back. But that's kind of where I'm at right now. Everything else looks pretty good. The other problem though is this body mount is really close to that little channel there on the step. So I don't know if I'm gonna have to cut that one off or not. I'm gonna do the front first and then see where it sits, because I might need to go forward or back, and it might just miss it, but we'll have to see. You can see the gap I have between the frame and the cab. On my 68, I pretty much had that little rib, if you can see it. This channel right here was basically on top of the frame, and that's kind of what I want to do with this one also. So we're gonna try to maybe just get some boards and just stick under there for now, just so it can sit down. Then I can adjust it where I want it, but I want that thing to be really close to the frame. I don't want a big gap in there. So that's where I'm at right now. I'm probably just gonna lop those two off, and then I can move this thing forward and back a lot better. All right, so now that those are cut off, put it down and see how it fits. All right, guys, we're getting pretty close. So this is pretty neat, and I didn't foresee this at all, but this frame is literally made for this chassis. It's pretty crazy. So that fits almost perfectly, but which is nice because that's gonna let us know our side to side. If it fits in there, we can measure from there. Now the problem is we have to raise the back of the cab up because the front is sitting right on that mount on the front. So I'm just gonna get some wood and then space up the back of it, so that way we can try to get our running board even with the ground. So, and try to get this thing kind of tilted back up. The cab on the 68, I actually had to notch out all this back panels and stuff, and this one fits a lot better. So I'm gonna see how close this is gonna be. It looks like it's right at it, but I don't even know if it's gonna be an issue because we are gonna have to space that back up. All right, guys, it is on the frame. I've been working on this thing for 2 days. Me and my buddy Jake helped me out yesterday, and it's already taken shape. It is a C60 on a Silverado chassis, and it looks pretty good. It fits way better than I was thinking it was gonna fit. I'm pretty happy with it. Let's show you guys what it looks like. So this is what it looks like. So I can probably shift this back and forth a little bit. I think the cab is actually twisted. The other side lines up a little bit better, but it's just sitting on there with some boards right now. But that's kind of where it wants to sit. The rocker is pretty level with the ground, but the issue I'm kind of debating is this lines up absolutely perfect. This frame is really close to that cutout, so I am gonna have to space it up to be able to get a core support mount on there. Or I could notch it like I did my 68, and that will set the body down a little bit more. So not really sure if I want to go a little bit lower or not. I want this thing to be kind of low because I want to fill in those wheel wells. They're gigantic, so I want to get a big enough wheel to be able to fill that in. And the lower I go, the more it'll look proportional. So I might have to lower it down a little bit more, but for now, that is what it's going to look like. For just a weekend worth of work, this is a pretty big transformation. So in the next C60 episode, we're gonna try to tie this thing down, figure out where we want this thing to sit on the frame, make some cab mounts, and make this thing one truck again. So you're not gonna wanna miss it. Make sure you like, comment, subscribe so you can stay up to date with all the episodes we have here on the C60 and all the rest of the projects we have here on Rustomod. Thanks for watching, guys, and we'll see you in the next one.